Is there anybody choose these lights out and not those? Hi, I'm Bruce Hood. Very happy to be asked here by Masha. I would like to, first of all, ask a question. How many in this room can claim full-blown, not quarter, half, three-quarters, but full-blown Native American heritage? I didn't think so. Therefore, we are all immigrants of one kind or another, are we not?
Yes.
And that's kind of a kinship that we share. We all are here in this room because someone at some time, for some reason, decided they had to leave where they were and seek something else better than what was going on where they were. In my case, it was the English people. I can trace my ancestry back to the first Mayflower. They were fleeing religious persecution. A very real thing in those times, still is in many places in the world. But anyway, we all have a common bond in that sense. And I think that gets to what you're talking about neighborhoods and neighbors. You know, who are our neighbors? Where is our neighborhood? And the whole global thing. We hear about global warming and global economy and global manufacturing. But we don't hear, in my humble opinion, enough about a global neighborhood. And who are our neighbors? And where is our neighborhood? So I'd like to spend a little bit of time with a couple of pictures that I've been very fortunate to be able to take traveling with the Food Resource Bank around the world, and talk a little bit about some of the issues that some people face in their own localities that force them to conclude that they have no choice but to leave their homeland and basically seek something else. There are millions and millions of people traveling around the world all the time. Some of them are traveling for business or pleasure, but others, not quite so nice. And sometimes people are fleeing their homeland for their very lives. This is a very real problem in our world today. Sometimes the issues are not quite as blatant. I mean, pretty much everyone can get their brain around, if I don't get out of here, I'm going to die. But there are lots of ways to die, and some of them are a little more subtle. Some of it's education, some of it's health, some of it's the ability to grow your own food. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's all to go. So I'd like to spend a couple of minutes just talking about some of the issues in some of the places in the world that force people to seek a different place to live. So who is my neighbor? I don't know about your streets, but my streets are not populated by people who look like this. Generally. My neighborhood doesn't look like that. Our neighbors deserve a good meal, at least one good meal in a day. Many, many millions don't get it. Food, I think, should be a basic right of being a human being. There should be food available. Not always. People should have the right to be able to grow their own food. On their own land. People should have the right to a decent education, a realistic education. We're not talking a Harvard education or a U of M or a realistic to their context education. People should have the right to stay together as a family. Increasingly difficult in many places. Hope and plan for the future. Sometimes that's awfully hard work for so many people. A lifelong struggle for many, many people. Very heavy lifting just to survive. So what is it about so many places, so many conditions around the world that force people to conclude that the only way forward for them is to leave their homeland and become strangers in a strange land. Sometimes they get to take some of their possessions with them. Other times it's just a long, lonely walk down a very dusty road. For whatever the reasons that they leave their homeland, they face a very uncertain future. But it has come to the point where the uncertainty of their future is more appealing than the certainty of their present condition. So again, some of the issues in some of the places in the world that become very difficult for people to live. In South America, the Andes Mountains run over 4,000 miles from north to south of the entire continent. This is a vertical world. Everything is either up or down. Extremely difficult to get from place to place easily. In a vertical world, if you want to grow things, terracing becomes very important. This village leader has organized a terrace building project in his community to create more room to grow their own vegetables. Without rock walls, this family is all that hard work making those terraces, all made out of mud and soil, will wash away with the first big rain. And it rains often. This guy's name is not John Deere, but he does make his own plow. Farming in this kind of territory, this up and down world, is extremely difficult at best with oxen and your own homemade plow. Roads used to be footpaths and animal paths. You can see the drop off there is rather steep. There's one, you can see a landslide happening right down here. It happens all the time. Before this road was put in, this is in Peru, by the way, before this road was put into this particular village, they had to walk over those mountains to the nearest town. That town was 30 miles away. That's as the crow flies, or the condor in that case. Much, much longer by the road. With very few vehicles in this village, any single vehicle is always constantly overloaded, getting just anywhere. This would be a fabulously beautiful place to live if it weren't so hard to make a living. Along with geography is water. I mean, water is a pretty basic necessity for any community to survive, any society. In many places in Africa, it rains twice a year. Sometimes not at all, but in many places, at the most, twice a year. And they have what they call seasonal rivers that are full of water only during the rainy season, which is sometimes as short as a couple of weeks. Dams built on the right place in some of these rivers will hold water, hopefully, until the next rain, sometimes as much as 6 months away. Many villages, however, don't have access to seasonal rivers. There just aren't any nearby. And so the walk to get water is up to 20 miles or more. And they come back with just as much as they can carry. Roads where they exist at all are extremely difficult. We're not talking walking on pavement out here. And there's the locals that I contend with. It can be an issue at times. 5 gallons of water weighs 40 pounds. This is how it's carried. It's almost always an all-day trip. The cup on the left there is what they come back with. That's what it looks like. Reminds me of weak coffee. It doesn't taste like that. The one on the right, this particular village has had introduced a sand filter, which takes out most of the gunk and makes it much more palatable. Not free of bugs, of course, but it does get rid of most of the dirt. But remember, 5 gallons again, that 5-gallon bucket that they come back with after an all-day trip. Just think of 5 gallons. That has to go for domestic use, crops, animals, if they're lucky enough to have some. We flush our toilet, there goes half of it right there. 5 gallons. Education is a big deal in many, many places of the world. And the literacy rates are huge in some of the more rural, impoverished countries. This is in Guatemala, and we were traveling out into the indigenous highlands of Guatemala, where the descendants of the ancient Maya live. And I kept on seeing this sign basically tattooed everywhere, on every rock, every tree, every telephone pole. And so I asked our local that we were traveling with, and I said, what's the deal with this sign? And it was just before national elections. And he explained that this is the symbol of one of the political parties trying to become president of the country. And then he said, the man who is behind this is one of the prime architects of the genocide that happened in Guatemala back in the 80s. And if he gets elected by these indigenous people, because they know no better than simply to recognize his symbol when they go to the ballot box, he's coming after them. It was the indigenous Mayan population that was at the brunt of most of the war down there. But because of the high literacy rates, they don't know who's behind this symbol. They don't recognize the symbol. Another sad story, basically because of illiteracy and unfamiliarity with property rights. This lady and 6 of her fellow villagers several years ago decided to form a pottery cooperative. They'd been making pots by hand for forever, and they were, selling a few here and there. But they figured by banding together, they would have more luck selling their pots. So they started making more and selling them into the little villages around them. They began to get a little bit of money, and eventually they had enough money to buy a good pottery wheel, so they didn't have to make it by hand anymore. They had enough money to buy a kiln, where they could really fire them well, instead of just the little fires that they could build by themselves. And they started selling some more in local villages, nearby villages, and even in some of the bigger towns. Well, the sad part of the story is that they did not own the building that they were in. And when the landowner heard of this quote-unquote thriving pottery business out in his village, where his building was, he came to the village and he claimed rights to the building and the equipment in it. They are now back to making pots by hand. In many places in Africa, you can't attend school unless you have a uniform and shoes. We see signs around all over here, no shirt, no shoes, no service. It's no shirt, no shoes, no school over there. Here's our little guy with AIDS. One of the many, many AIDS orphans spread across the continent of Africa. He has lost both his parents. He now has the disease himself. And because of that, he's not allowed to attend school with the rest of the kids in his village. In the very unlikely event he survives his own disease, he won't have the education of his peers. Politics. When the elephants fight, the ants suffer. In Honduras, this dam was almost finished when new national elections brought a new political party into power. And that political party did not agree with the politics of the local communities around where this dam was, and they decided that the dam was, quote, no longer necessary. That was a purely political decision, and it deprived many communities, many communities out in the hinterlands, access to safe water. The one thing that this picture doesn't convey is the incredible stench that comes up from that as you again think of that